I still remember the first time I brought Miguel home to meet my family. I was so proud to introduce him. He was kind, gentle, and the hardest working person I knew. He made me feel like the best version of myself, and I wanted to share that with the people who supposedly cared about me most. But from the moment we walked through the front door, I could feel the tension in the air. My mom, Evelyn, had that tight smile plastered on her face, the one she wore when she was trying to mask her disappointment. My dad, Henry, barely looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable, a wall of indifference. And then there was my sister, Victoria, with her usual condescending smirk. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel their judgment before Miguel even said a word. Miguel greeted them warmly, completely oblivious to the invisible barriers they'd already put up. He shook my dad's hand, tried to compliment my mom's taste in decor, and even offer Victoria a sincere smile. She didn't even bother hiding the way her eyes scanned him from head to toe, taking in his simple clothes, his worn shoes, his tattoos poking out from beneath his sleeves. I could see her judgment seep through her eyes. This was going to be harder than I thought. Dinner was tense. My mom, ever the perfectionist, had gone all out, serving up a meal that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. But she barely said a word to Miguel, instead choosing to interrogate him with thinly veiled questions. So, Miguel, what exactly do you do? She asked, her voice dripping with forced politeness. Jasmine said you're an artist? Yes, ma'am, Miguel answered, unfazed. I've been working on building my portfolio, mostly freelancing, and trying to get some pieces displayed at local galleries. It's tough, but I love it. My dad scoffed under his breath, though he probably thought no one noticed. An artist, huh? Tough field to make a real living in, he muttered, not looking up from his plate. The condescension was palpable. I clenched my fork so tightly I thought it might snap. Miguel, as gracious as ever, just nodded and smiled, handling their rudeness better than I was. Actually, Dad, Miguel has had some interest from a couple of galleries. He's really talented, I interjected, hoping to steer the conversation somewhere positive. Victoria es norte. Interest doesn't pay bills, Jazz. Don't be naive. Her words were sharp, and she didn't even try to hide her disdain. I mean, how do you expect to support each other if you can't even make a steady income? It felt like a slap in the face. They weren't even pretending to hide their contempt anymore. My cheeks flushed, and I looked to Miguel, hoping he wasn't hurt by their words. He caught my gaze and gave me a small, reassuring smile. But I knew him too well. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, the way he forced that smile to keep me calm. You know, Victoria, I'm not expecting Jasmine to support me. I've been working 2 jobs on top of my art. It's not easy, but it's something I'm passionate about, he said, his voice steady but respectful. He didn't owe them an explanation, yet he offered one anyway. My mother's lips pursed, her eyes flicking between us with that familiar look of disapproval. Passion is nice, Miguel, she said, barely masking her condescension. But Jasmine has worked so hard to get where she is. Don't you think she deserves someone who can keep up with her? My stomach twisted. The blatant disrespect was like a slap in the face, not only to Miguel but to me. I wanted to scream at them, to make them see how wrong they were. Miguel wasn't some charity case, as Victoria had snidely called him earlier. He was the most decent, hardworking person I knew. But before I could say anything, Miguel placed a hand over mine, calming me down. Mrs. Davis, he said, keeping his voice as gentle as ever. I may not have the kind of success you're used to, but I love Jasmine. I want to give her everything I can, even if that means working harder than I ever have. I just hope that's enough. There was a brief silence, and for a moment, I hoped his words had broken through their judgment, that they'd see the sincerity in his eyes. But then my dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a skeptical look. Love doesn't pay the bills, he said, almost dismissively. What happens when the novelty wears off? What can you really offer her, Miguel? I felt my blood boil. They were treating him like he was nothing, like he was some sort of inconvenience in my life that I'd grow tired of. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them how wrong they were, but Miguel just tightened his grip on my hand, silently pleading for me to stay calm. I'm not here to take anything from Jasmine, Miguel replied evenly. I'm here because I love her and want to build a life together with her. I'm willing to work hard for that, no matter what it takes. My mother shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Well, love is a lovely sentiment, but it doesn't change reality. Jasmine, you deserve someone who can provide stability, someone who can match your level. I'm not saying Miguel isn't well intentioned, but let's be realistic. Her words hung in the air like a poison cloud, suffocating any hope I had that they'd accept Miguel. I couldn't hold back anymore. Why can't you just be happy for me? I burst out, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. I love him, and he's good to me. Isn't that enough? My dad let out a derisive laugh. Enough? Jasmine, you don't even know what you're talking about. You're too young, too blinded by whatever you think this is. But someday, you'll see that we're only trying to protect you from making a huge mistake. I felt my heart shatter a little. My own parents, the people who were supposed to support me, were treating my happiness like a mistake, like a liability. They didn't care about how Miguel made me feel. They only cared about their own image and what my choices would reflect on them. Miguel started to speak up, but my mother cut him off. Look, Miguel, I'm sure you're a decent young man, but this isn't going to work. Jasmine needs stability, not someone chasing pipe dreams. Maybe it's best if you both to reconsider things before they get any more serious. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. She wasn't suggesting. She was commanding. I looked at Miguel, feeling helpless, watching as his face fell. The kindness in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a deep hurt. And I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't let them push him away. I wouldn't let them win. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, pulling Miguel up with me. If you can't accept Miguel, then you're not accepting me either, I said, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. I don't need your money, your support, or your approval. I'm choosing him, and if that means leaving this family behind, then so be it. My mother gasped, and my father's face twisted in fury. You're being ridiculous, Jasmine, he spat, his voice laced with disbelief. You're really going to throw everything away for this? Yes, I said firmly, feeling a strange sense of freedom wash over me. I am. I held Miguel's hand tightly as we turned and walked out, leaving behind the cold, oppressive walls of my childhood home. The sound of my mother's shocked gasp and my father's angry curses faded as we stepped into the night, the crisp air filling my lungs, reminding me that I was free. Outside, under the quiet of the stars, Miguel pulled me close, his voice soft as he whispered, You didn't have to do that for me, Jasmine. I looked up at him, feeling a fierce determination rise within me. I wanted to, I replied. I chose you, Miguel. I'd rather struggle with you than be comfortable with them. In that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Moving in with Miguel was a whirlwind of emotions. The first few weeks were challenging as we navigated the realities of living together in a small, one-bedroom apartment that had seen better days. The walls were a faded shade of beige, the carpet frayed, and the kitchen barely fit our modest grocery haul. Yet, there was something exhilarating about it, something that made me feel alive. This was my choice, my life, and I was determined to make it work. Miguel had taken the lead in transforming the space. With his artistic flair, he adorned the walls with his paintings, each piece a vibrant explosion of color and emotion. I loved watching him work, seeing his passion come alive with each brushstroke. There was something magnetic about the way he lost himself in his art, and it reminded me why I had fallen for him in the first place. I was balancing my final year of medical school while working part-time at a cafe to help pay the rent. Mornings were often a blur, a mix of coffee, late-night study sessions, and stolen moments with Miguel before I rushed out the door. I could feel the strain of it all, the pressure mounting as deadlines approached and exams loomed. But every evening, after long shifts and tedious lectures, Miguel would have dinner waiting, a simple yet hearty meal that made the weight of the day feel lighter. As I threw myself into my studies, I began to notice how quickly the days turned into weeks. Miguel's art started gaining traction in the local scene. He would often talk about how a gallery was interested in showcasing his work, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Despite the excitement, he carried the weight of uncertainty, afraid that his success might be fleeting, just a stroke of luck. One night, while I was buried in textbooks, he surprised me by coming home earlier than usual. The door swung open, and there he was, his face lit up with an enthusiasm that made my heart leap. Jazz, you won't believe this, he exclaimed, practically bouncing on his feet. I looked up, curiosity peaked. What happened? I got a call from the Riverside Gallery. They want to showcase my work next month. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and I felt my heart swell with pride. That's amazing, Miguel. I jumped up, throwing my arms around him. You deserve this. All your hard work is finally paying off. He pulled back slightly, a hint of doubt creeping into his expression. But what if nobody shows up? What if it's just another failed attempt? I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my gaze. You're talented, Miguel. People will see that. This is your chance to shine. Don't let fear hold you back. He nodded, but I could tell the anxiety lingered beneath the surface. We spent the evening celebrating, discussing what the exhibit would look like, what pieces he'd display, and how he wanted to present his story through his art. For a brief moment, it felt like all our worries faded away. As the weeks passed, we poured our energy into preparing for the gallery. Miguel worked tirelessly, painting until the early hours of the morning while I juggled studying and waiting tables. Our lives became a beautiful chaos, a blend of love, ambition, and the struggle to make ends meet. Yet, despite the stress, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy. I had chosen this life, and I was determined to make it work. The day of the exhibit arrived, and the gallery buzzed with excitement. I helped Miguel set up, arranging his pieces with care, each painting telling a story of its own. I could see his nervousness building, his fingers trembling as he adjusted the frames. But as people started to filter in, their admiration for his work began to lift his spirits. Jazz, look. They're actually stopping to look, he said, pointing to a couple who had paused in front of one of his larger pieces. Do you think they like it? Of course they do. You're incredible. I squeezed his hand, my heart racing with pride. As the night progressed, I watched him interact with guests, his confidence blossoming with each compliment he received. By the time the evening came to a close, the gallery had sold several pieces, including the one that had taken him weeks to finish. This is unbelievable, he said, disbelief washing over him. I didn't think this would actually happen. You earned every bit of it, I replied, feeling tears of joy prick at my eyes. You've worked so hard, and now it's all paying off. After the exhibit, we celebrated at a small diner nearby, toasting with milkshakes and fries, our laughter echoing in the quiet restaurant. It felt like a dream, a moment where everything aligned perfectly, where our sacrifices and struggles suddenly felt worthwhile. However, as Miguel's star began to rise, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of tension that loomed in the background. My parents had been silent since I'd moved out, their disapproval hanging over me like a dark cloud. I had made my choice, and yet a part of me longed for their acceptance. But every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered their disdainful words and the way they treated Miguel. It wasn't long before I received a call from my mother. Her voice dripped with the same forced politeness that always set my teeth on edge. Jasmine, it's been a while since we've heard from you. I hope you're doing well, she said, her tone deceptively sweet. Mom, I'm busy with school and work. Is there something you need? I tried to keep my voice steady, but my heart raced, anticipating the conversation that was bound to unfold. Well, your father and I were concerned about you, she continued, her voice suddenly stern. We've heard some things about Miguel. You know how we feel about his background, and we worry that you're making a mistake. I felt my blood boil. He's not a mistake, Mom. He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm happy. Happiness isn't enough, she shot back. You need someone who can provide for you, Jasmine. Someone with ambition and stability. I know you're trying to convince yourself that this is right, but we want what's best for you. Do you even care about what I want? I spent frustrations spitting over. You don't know anything about my life, about who I am now. Miguel supports me more than you ever have. You're not my safety net anymore. Don't speak to me like that, she exclaimed, her voice sharp. You need to open your eyes, Jasmine. You're throwing away everything we've built for you. Everything you've built for me, not everything I've built for myself. I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm done. You don't get to dictate my life anymore. The line went silent, the weight of our conversation hanging heavy between us. I hung up, trembling with a mixture of anger and relief. I had finally stood up for myself, but I couldn't shake the lingering ache of disapproval. The following weeks were a blur. Miguel's artwork continued to gain attention, and he received an invitation to showcase at a larger exhibit in the city. He was thriving, but I felt the strain of my unresolved family issues lurking beneath the surface. Each time I saw him basking in the glow of his success, the knot in my stomach tightened. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, Miguel could sense my distraction. You're not yourself tonight, he said, stirring the pasta while glancing over at me. What's on your mind? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I just had another talk with my mom. She's still pushing for me to break things off with you. It's exhausting. Miguel frowned, his expression softening with concern. You shouldn't have to deal with that. You've made your choice. I know, but I hesitated, trying to articulate my feelings. I thought they'd come around, that they'd see how happy I am. But all they do is criticize and try to control me. It's like they can't accept that I've chosen a different path. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me, his warmth grounding me. You're not responsible for their happiness, Jasmine. You've done what's best for you. You deserve to live the life you want, not the one they expect. As he spoke, I felt the tension in my chest begin to ease. He was right. I had chosen my path, and it was beautiful. But the ache of disconnection from my family still stung. I needed to find a way to reconcile these feelings without sacrificing what I had with Miguel. Days turned into weeks, and Miguel's career flourished. He started receiving commissions from private collectors, his paintings becoming more sought after. It was exhilarating to see him succeed, and I reveled in the pride that bubbled within me. But with every triumph, my parents seemed to become more entrenched in their beliefs. I had shut them out of my life, and while I felt liberated, there was a nagging feeling that I had left a part of myself behind. One afternoon, as I prepared for a shift at the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text. It was a message from Victoria, my sister. It was rare for her to reach out to me, and I felt a mixture of dread and curiosity as I opened it. Hey, I heard about Miguel's success. Dad wants to talk. Can we meet? My heart raced. The idea of facing my family again sent a rush of anxiety through me. What does he want? I texted back. Just to talk. He wants to apologize and see how you're doing. It's serious. Please come. I looked up at Miguel, who was drying the dishes, and he paused to meet my gaze. What's wrong? He asked, sensing my unease. It's my sister. She wants me to meet with Dad. He claims he wants to apologize. Miguel's brow furrowed in concern. Do you think they've changed? After everything they said. I don't know, but maybe it's worth hearing them out. The words tasted foreign on my tongue, but a part of me craved closure. You have to do what feels right for you, Jazz. I'll support you, whatever you decide, he said, his voice gentle. Taking a deep breath, I replied to Victoria, agreeing to meet. We set a time for the following evening, and as I prepared for the encounter, I felt a whirlpool of emotions: hope, fear, anger, and a strange desire for reconciliation. That night, I hardly slept. My mind raced with possibilities of what could happen. What if they truly had changed? What if they still viewed Miguel as beneath me? I wrestled with these thoughts until dawn, wondering if I was walking into a trap or an opportunity for healing. When the evening arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt confident yet comfortable. Miguel offered me a reassuring smile as I prepared to leave. You've got this, Jazz. Just stay true to yourself, he said, his hand squeezing mine tightly. Thanks, Miguel. I'll be back soon, I replied, though my heart raced with uncertainty. The drive to my parents' house felt like a journey through a storm. I parked in front of their sprawling home. The same house that had once filled me with warmth now felt alien. As I walked up to the door, memories flooded back. Birthday parties, family dinners, laughter echoing through the halls. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by the hurt of recent events. When I knocked, it felt like an eternity before my mother opened the door. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of apprehension and forced cordiality. "Jasmine," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming." Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. I followed her into the living room, where my father sat on the couch, his demeanor serious. Victoria hovered nearby, her expression cautious. "Sit down, Jasmine," my dad said, motioning to the armchair across from him. I took a seat, my heart pounding in my chest. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice low. "I know things have been difficult between us. Your mother and I have had time to reflect." I held my breath, waiting for the moment where they'd express genuine remorse or understanding. But the skepticism in my mind lingered, reminding me of their previous disdain for my choices. "I'm sorry for how we treated Miguel," he continued, looking down. "We were too harsh. I didn't understand the depth of your feelings for him." My heart quickened. Was this genuine? "And how do you feel about him now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "We've had to reconsider our views. It's not easy, Jasmine. We were raised to believe in social standings, but he trailed off, struggling for the right words. I see now that I was wrong to judge him without knowing him." I glanced at my mother, whose eyes darted nervously. "You have to understand, we only wanted what was best for you. We never meant to push you away." My heart softened slightly, but I couldn't ignore the hurt they had caused. "You can't just expect me to forgive and forget. I needed your support when I made my choice, not your criticism." "I know, and I'm truly sorry," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling. "We've missed you, Jasmine. Your father and I, oh, we want to be a part of your life again." I looked between them, searching for sincerity. "You're still treating Miguel as if he's beneath you," I said, my voice firm. "He's not just an artist. He's my partner, and I need you to accept him." We will," my father insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. "We want to get to know him. We realize now that we were wrong to assume we knew what was best for you." Silence hung heavily in the air. I wanted to believe them, to trust that they had changed, but my heart was still guarded. "How do I know this isn't just about appearances?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Victoria jumped in, her expression earnest. "We've seen how happy you are with Miguel, Jazz. I want you to be happy, too. It's hard for us, but we're willing to try." I took a deep breath, weighing their words against my instincts. Maybe it was time to give them a chance, but my heart still ached with the memory of their disdain. "Okay, but this is not a free pass," I replied, my voice unwavering. "If you want to be a part of my life, you have to accept Miguel fully. No more backhanded comments, no more looking down on him. If that's too hard, then we're done here." They nodded, and I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this could lead to something better. But in the back of my mind, I wondered if it would last. As I left my parents' home that evening, I felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The air felt lighter, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that things might not be as straightforward as they seemed. When I returned home, Miguel was waiting for me, concern etched on his face. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice soft but anxious. "They apologized," I said slowly, unsure of how to articulate the complexity of my emotions. "But I made it clear that it won't be easy for them to win me back." Miguel stepped closer, wrapping me in his arms. "I'm proud of you, Jazz. You stood your ground. I still don't know if I can trust them," I admitted, burying my face in his shoulder. "It's complicated. Let's take it one step at a time. We've built our life together, and I'm here for you no matter what." His words comforted me, wrapping me in warmth as we stood there in our small apartment, surrounded by his art and the life we had created together. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together. But deep down, I sensed that the journey toward reconciliation with my family was just beginning, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. The weeks that followed my meeting with my parents were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt hopeful yet apprehensive as we navigated the delicate waters of rebuilding our relationship. They made it a point to reach out regularly, often asking about Miguel and how I was doing. I could see the effort they were putting in, but a part of me remained guarded, wary of their true intentions. I wanted to believe that things could change, but old habits die hard. Miguel, ever supportive, encouraged me to keep an open mind. They might surprise you, he said one evening as we prepared dinner together. People can change, especially when they realize they've made mistakes. I wanted to believe him, but my heart was still weighed down by the hurt of their past judgments. Every time I heard my mother's voice on the phone or saw my father's texts, I felt a mix of gratitude and resentment. They were trying, but it didn't erase the pain of their previous rejection. One sunny Saturday afternoon, they invited us over for lunch. It had been a while since I had seen them, and while Miguel was apprehensive, I insisted we go. Let's give them a chance, I said, determination in my voice. Maybe this time will be different. As we drove to their house, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. I couldn't shake the memories of our last encounters, but Miguel held my hand tightly, grounding me. We'll be fine, he said, his confidence radiating. When we arrived, my parents greeted us with warm smiles that felt almost too eager. They had prepared a lovely lunch, complete with my favorite dishes. The house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax, to hope that maybe we could find common ground. Jasmine, it's so good to see you, my mother exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. I felt the sincerity in her voice, but I could still sense the undercurrent of expectation, the pressure to conform to their ideals. Thanks, Mom. It's good to be here, I replied, forcing a smile as I stepped back. Miguel stood beside me, a little stiff but polite, his eyes scanning the room. I could see him assessing the situation, ever the protector. Let's eat, my father announced, clapping his hands together. I'm sure you're both starving. We sat around the dining table, and I marveled at the effort my parents had put into the meal. Everything looked beautiful, but I couldn't help but notice the tension simmering beneath the surface. My mother shot glances at Miguel, and I could tell she was holding back her opinions. Tell us about your latest project, Miguel, my father said, breaking the silence that hung in the air. I heard your last exhibit was a success. Miguel looked momentarily surprised, but quickly gathered his composure. Thank you. Yes, the exhibit went really well. I was able to showcase some pieces that mean a lot to me, and I sold a few as well, he said, pride evident in his voice. Sold a few? My mother echoed, her tone slightly incredulous. How many is a few? For pieces, actually, he replied, his voice steady. I could see the hint of defiance in his eyes, and I admired him for it. That's impressive, my father said, nodding, but I could hear the skepticism laced in his words. But how sustainable is that? How do you plan to support yourself long term? Miguel maintained his calm demeanor. I'm working on building a client base and exploring different avenues for my art. I'm committed to making this work, and I believe it can be sustainable if I keep pushing forward. Good, my father said, but I could tell he was still unconvinced. You need to think about stability, Miguel. Art can be a fickle career. The tension thickened as the conversation shifted back to safer topics, like the weather and my recent classes. I could feel Miguel's discomfort growing, but he remained gracious, engaging with my parents and answering their questions. I appreciated his patience, but part of me wanted to shout at them, to just accept him for who he was. As lunch progressed, I caught my mother stealing glances at me. Her expression flickered between concern and hope. Jasmine, have you thought any more about your future? Your career? She asked, her voice dipping into that familiar tone of motherly worry. I felt my heart drop. I'm on track to graduate, Mom. I have my residency lined up, and I'm really excited about it, I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the weight of her expectations. That's wonderful, but what about starting a family? she pressed, a hint of desperation in her voice. You know, there's more to life than just work. You need to think about your future and settling down. I clenched my jaw. I am thinking about my future, and I want it to be with Miguel. We're building something together, and that's important to me. My mother's smile faltered, her disappointment palpable. But Jasmine, you can't expect Miguel to provide that stability right now. You have so much potential, and I just want what's best for you. Miguel's hand found mine under the table, a silent reassurance. I squeezed his fingers, grounding myself. I appreciate your concern, but I've made my choice, and I hope you can support that, I said firmly, my gaze locking with my mother's. I just want you to be happy, she replied, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Then support my happiness, I insisted. Support my choices. The conversation shifted again, but the air remained heavy with unspoken words. I could tell my mother was struggling to adapt to my newfound independence. She wanted to protect me, but couldn't see that I was happy with Miguel, that my choices were valid. As lunch wrapped up, my father suggested a walk in the nearby park. Let's stretch our legs a bit. It's a beautiful day, he said, trying to keep the mood light. Reluctantly, we agreed. The park was lush and green, the sun shining down as we strolled along the path. I could hear children laughing nearby, families enjoying their weekend, and for a moment, I felt a sense of normalcy, a flicker of hope that we could rebuild our family bond. But as we walked, the conversation turned back to Miguel. You know, I respect that you're passionate about your art, but you need to think practically, my father said, his tone once again veering into condescension. You're not just doing this for fun. You need to be able to support Jasmine. Miguel's jaw tightened, and I could feel the tension rising. I am working hard to make this my career. I love what I do, and I believe it will lead to stability in the future, he replied, his voice steady but firm. Stability? In art. My father scoffed. That's a dangerous game, son. I've seen too many people fail at that. You need to be realistic. Miguel stopped walking, his frustration bubbling to the surface. With all due respect, sir, I'm not looking for your validation. I'm doing what I love, and I won't apologize for it. I stepped in, sensing the conversation spiraling. Dad, Miguel has worked incredibly hard. He's building his career, and it's paying off. Why can't you just support him instead of doubting him? My father sighed, shaking his head. I just don't want either of you to get hurt. You're young, and life can be cruel. I felt a rush of anger. You don't get to dictate my happiness or Miguel's. We're both capable of making our own decisions. The tension was palpable as we continued walking, silence hanging heavily around us. I felt like a child again, caught between my parents and the man I loved. But I was done playing that role. I had chosen Miguel, and I wouldn't let my family tear us apart. As we approached a park bench, my father turned to Miguel, his expression softening slightly. Look, I'm not saying I don't respect your passion, but I hope you understand that Jasmine comes from a different world. She's been given opportunities that many don't have. Then maybe she deserves someone who will support her in those opportunities, Miguel replied, his voice steady. I want to be that person, but I need you to see that I'm not a burden. I'm a partner. I could see my father struggling with his pride. I just want the best for my daughter. I want her to succeed, he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice surprising me. She will succeed, Dad. But I need you to believe in me, in us, I said, feeling the weight of my words. The conversation lingered in the air, and as we sat on the bench, I could sense the cracks beginning to form in the walls my parents had built around their beliefs. They were starting to understand that my happiness didn't depend on their approval, but it would take time. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, I felt a sense of peace settle within me. Maybe this was the first step toward mending our relationship, a step that didn't require me to sacrifice my happiness. Over the next few weeks, my parents continued to reach out, and slowly but surely, I began to let my guard down. They met Miguel more frequently, and while their comments were still laced with subtle judgments, I could sense their attitudes softening. One evening, after a long day at the cafe, I received a text from my mother. We're having a family barbecue next Saturday. We'd love for you and Miguel to join us. It's a chance for us to get to know him better. I shared the message with Miguel, my heart racing with anticipation and apprehension. What do you think? I asked, biting my lip. He frowned slightly, uncertainty clouding his features. Are you sure you want to put yourself through that again? What if they're still judgmental? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. I think it's worth a shot. We've come this far, and I want to show them that we're a team. Plus, I can't keep avoiding them forever. Miguel nodded slowly, and I could see the resolve in his eyes. Okay, then, let's do it together. I'll be there by your side. As Saturday approached, I spent the week preparing mentally for the barbecue. I wanted to make a good impression, to show my parents that Miguel was more than just a choice. I was choosing a life with him. I picked out a casual but nice outfit, hoping to strike the right balance between comfortable and presentable. When the day finally arrived, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. We arrived at my parents' house, the familiar structure looming before us. The smell of grilled burgers and sizzling vegetables wafted through the air, and I could hear laughter echoing from the backyard. Here we go, I muttered, squeezing Miguel's hand for reassurance as we walked toward the sound of voices. As we stepped into the backyard, my parents greeted us with warm smiles, but I could still sense the tension beneath the surface. The scene was set with a long table adorned with colorful plates and drinks, a mix of family, and a few close friends gathered for the occasion. Jasmine, Miguel, so glad you could make it, my mother exclaimed, her enthusiasm almost too eager. Thanks for having us, I replied, forcing a smile as Miguel and I exchanged glances, both of us sensing the apprehension in the air. My father approached, extending his hand to Miguel. Good to see you again, son. We appreciate you joining us, he said, his voice sincere but laced with uncertainty. Miguel took his hand firmly, returning the gesture. Thank you for having me, sir. I'm looking forward to it. The atmosphere felt tense yet hopeful, and as we settled into the gathering, I tried to focus on enjoying the moment. We mingled with family members who were warm but still cautious around Miguel. I could see them making an effort to be polite, but I also felt the underlying judgment lingering, as if they were waiting for him to slip up. At one point, I overheard a conversation between my mother and one of her friends. I just worry about Jasmine. She's so talented, and she could have anyone, my mother said, her voice carrying over the sound of laughter. I felt my heart sink as I realized the way she was still framing the narrative. I just hope she knows what she's doing, she continued. It's a risk dating someone like him. Miguel, who had been standing nearby, caught my eye. I could see the hurt in his expression, and my heart ached for him. I knew he was trying his best to impress my family, but their words cut deeper than any criticism. I walked over, determined to address the elephant in the room. Mom, Miguel is more than just someone like him. He's my partner, and he deserves your respect, I said firmly, my voice steady. My mother turned to me, her surprise evident. I'm just worried for you, Jasmine. I want what's best for you, she replied, but I could see the defensiveness creeping in. I understand that, but you need to understand that Miguel is what's best for me. He's hardworking, talented, and has already achieved so much. You can't keep comparing him to someone from your world. The conversation shifted as my father joined us, sensing the tension. Let's just enjoy the barbecue, shall we? Miguel, why don't you tell us about your latest project? He suggested, hoping to diffuse the situation. As Miguel began to speak about his latest artistic endeavors, I watched my parents' expressions change. There was a glimmer of curiosity in their eyes, and for the first time, I felt like they were starting to see Miguel for who he truly was. The evening progressed, filled with laughter and stories, and I felt a sense of unity growing among us. It was tentative, fragile even, but it was there. I could see Miguel relaxing, sharing his passion for art, and engaging with my family. However, as the sun began to set, I caught my mother pulling Miguel aside for a private conversation. I felt a pang of anxiety as I watched them talk, Miguel's face shifting from enthusiasm to caution. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language told me everything. When they returned, Miguel wore a forced smile, but I could see the unease in his eyes. Everything okay? I asked, concern etched across my face. Yeah, just a chat, he replied, but I could tell something was bothering him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I felt a mix of hope and dread as we left my parents' house, both of us quiet in the car. I could sense Miguel's discomfort, and I knew my mother's conversation had unsettled him. What did she say? I finally asked, breaking the silence as we pulled into our driveway. Miguel hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. She just mentioned that she wants what's best for you and that it's important for you to have someone who can match your ambitions, he said, avoiding eye contact. I felt anger rising within me. She doesn't get to dictate my life or my choices. I'm happy with you, and that should be enough for her. I replied, my voice steady but filled with emotion. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but it still stings. I just want to prove myself to them. I want to show them that I'm worthy of being with you. You're worthy, Miguel. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I insisted, frustration boiling over. They're stuck in their ways, and I won't let their opinions affect us. He nodded, but I could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. We stepped inside our apartment, and I could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on us. I wanted to make it better, to reassure him that we were on the right path, but the unease lingered. Over the next few days, I noticed a shift in Miguel. He became more focused on his work, pouring himself into his art as if to escape the tension of our families. I admired his dedication, but I worried about the distance that was growing between us. He was physically present, but emotionally, he seemed to retreat into himself. One evening, as we sat together in our small living room, I tried to bridge the gap. Miguel, I know things have been tense lately, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you, I said, reaching for his hand. You've been so supportive, and I don't want you to feel like you have to prove anything. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and pain. I just hate feeling like I'm not good enough for you or your family. I know they still don't fully accept me, and it hurts. You are more than enough for me, I insisted, squeezing his hand tighter. I chose you, Miguel. I'll always choose you. We just need to keep pushing through this together. He nodded, but I could see the uncertainties still lingering. I want to believe that, Jazz. I really do. But it's hard when I feel like I'm constantly being scrutinized. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. Let's focus on us. We have our own life to build, our own dreams to chase. We can't let their opinions dictate our happiness. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a sense of clarity. We had come too far to let anyone tear us apart. But deep down, I knew that we still had battles to fight, both with our families and within ourselves. As the weeks rolled on, Miguel's career continued to flourish, but my parents' subtle judgments weighed heavily on my heart. I felt torn between my loyalty to Miguel and the desire for my family's acceptance. The pressure was mounting, and I feared it would drive a wedge between us. Then one evening, everything changed. I received a phone call from my father, his voice laced with urgency. Jasmine, I need to talk to you. It's about your mother. The worry that flooded my mind was instant. What's wrong? I asked, my heart racing. It's serious. Can you come over? I glanced at Miguel, his brow furrowed with concern. I'll go with you, he said, determination in his voice. As we drove to my parents' house, I felt a sense of dread settling in. What could have happened? I could see Miguel's apprehension reflected in his eyes, and I knew he was just as worried as I was. When we arrived, the atmosphere was tense. My mother was seated on the couch, her face pale and drawn. My father paced the room, his expression frantic. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. It's your mother. She's been feeling unwell, and we think it might be serious. My father replied, his voice thick with concern. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? What's wrong with her? We're going to the hospital for tests, he said, running a hand through his hair. We wanted you to be here when we found out. I felt a rush of emotions, fear, worry, confusion. I turned to Miguel, who was watching me closely, his expression filled with empathy. "What can we do?" he asked softly. "Just be here," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As we waited for news, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on us. My mother's illness brought a sudden clarity to our relationship. I realized how much I had taken for granted, how fragile life could be. It forced me to confront the reality of my family dynamics and the love I had for them despite our struggles. Eventually, a doctor entered the room, and my heart raced as I braced myself for the news. "I'm afraid your mother has a serious condition," he said, and I felt my world shift beneath me. "We need to run more tests to determine the extent, but it's likely that she'll require surgery." I turned to my father, who was visibly shaken. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We'll face this together," he said, his strength faltering. "I just want her to be okay." In that moment, everything else faded into the background. All the animosity, all the judgment, it didn't matter. My family was facing a crisis, and I knew I had to step up. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself spending more time at my parents' house, supporting them through the uncertainty of my mother's health. Miguel stood by my side, always present and supportive, reminding me that we were in this together. But the strain of it all was palpable. My mother's condition weighed heavily on us, and I could see the toll it was taking on my father. He had always been the pillar of strength, but now he seemed fragile and vulnerable. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I caught him staring at the wall, lost in thought. "Dad, how are you holding up?" I asked, concern etched across my face. "I'm just worried about your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'll do if she doesn't pull through." I felt a lump in my throat. "She's strong, Dad. She's going to fight this, and we'll be right here with her." He turned to me, his expression softening. "I know I haven't been the best father, Jasmine. I've made mistakes and I've hurt you, but I need you to know that I care about you and your happiness. I'm sorry for everything." His words caught me off guard, and for the first time, I felt a glimpse of the father I had always wanted. "Thank you, Dad. It means a lot to hear you say that," I replied, my voice trembling. As the days passed, I began to see glimpses of hope. My mother underwent surgery, and while recovery was slow, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I spent hours at the hospital, sitting by her side, listening to her stories, reminiscing about our family vacations, and sharing laughter through the tears. But the experience also forced my parents to confront their prejudices. They began to see Miguel for the man he was, not the stereotypes they had imposed upon him. During one of my mother's better days, she surprised me by asking about him. "How's Miguel doing?" she asked, her voice still weak, but laced with genuine curiosity. "He's great, Mom. He's been my rock through all of this," I replied, smiling. "He cares about you too, you know." She nodded, looking thoughtful. I realize now that I was wrong to judge him. He loves you, and that's what matters. I felt a rush of hope. He's not just my boyfriend, Mom. He's my partner. He supports me in everything, and I wish you could see that. "I want to," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "I want to understand." As the weeks turned into months, my mother's recovery brought our family closer together. The experience forced us to confront our issues and find common ground. I could see my parents beginning to change, starting to accept Miguel, albeit slowly. One evening, as I prepared dinner at home, I felt a renewed sense of optimism. I could hear Miguel in the other room, working on his latest project, and the sound of his brush against the canvas filled the space with warmth. As I plated the food, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my mother, and my heart raced as I opened it. "Can we have dinner together tomorrow? I want to talk." My stomach fluttered with excitement and anxiety. "Sure, what time?" I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. "Let's say 6. Just us and Miguel." I turned to Miguel, my heart racing. "My mom wants to have dinner with us tomorrow. Just the 3 of us." He looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Is that a good thing? Are you ready for that?" "I think so. It feels like we're finally making progress," I said, my voice filled with hope. The next evening arrived, and as we prepared for dinner, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. I wanted to believe that this was a turning point, a chance for us to solidify our bond as a family. When we arrived at my parents' house, the familiar scent of home cooked food greeted us. My mother had gone all out, preparing a meal that made my heart swell with nostalgia. Welcome. I'm so glad you both could make it, she said, her smile warm and genuine. As we sat around the table, the atmosphere felt different. There was a sense of openness, a willingness to connect that hadn't been there before. We shared stories, laughed over memories, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of unity growing among us. At one point, my mother turned to Miguel, her eyes filled with sincerity. I've seen how much you care for Jasmine, and I appreciate everything you've done for her. I want to get to know you better. Miguel looked surprised but grateful. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. I care about Jasmine more than anything, and I want to make her happy. Let's focus on the future. My father chimed in, his tone more supportive than it had ever been. We can work together to understand each other better. I want you both to know that I'm here for you. As dinner wrapped up, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe we could truly mend the fractures in our family. We began to discuss plans for the future, and I could see Miguel relaxing, his confidence returning as he shared his dreams and aspirations. But just as the evening seemed to flow smoothly, my mother's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted from joy to concern. It's about your father's business, she said, her voice strained. There's been an issue with a client, and I need to take this call. Miguel and I exchanged glances, a wave of worry washing over us. The momentary peace we had felt slipped away, replaced by a sense of uncertainty. As she stepped away to take the call, I could see Miguel's anxiety return. What do you think is happening? He asked, concern etched on his face. I don't know, but it doesn't sound good. I replied, my heart racing. I had seen my father struggle with his business before, and it had always been a source of tension in our family. When my mother returned, her expression was grave. I'm sorry, but there's a serious problem. We need to discuss it, she said, her voice shaky. The atmosphere shifted again, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on us. My heart raced as I braced myself for whatever news awaited us. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically when my mother returned from her call. I could feel the tension radiating off her, a stark contrast to the warmth we had just shared over dinner. Miguel and I exchanged concerned glances, both of us sensing that the evening had taken a turn. Is everything okay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as the knot in my stomach tightened. No, my mother said, her face pale. There's been a major issue with one of Dad's clients. It's serious, Jasmine. They're threatening to pull out of their contract, and if they do, it could ruin us. I felt my heart sink. My father had built his business from the ground up, and hearing that it was on the brink of collapse sent a wave of panic through me. What does that mean for you both? I asked, glancing at Miguel, who looked equally worried. It means we could lose everything we've worked for. I don't know how we'll recover from this, she said, her voice trembling. The reality of her words hit me hard. The stakes were high, and my parents were facing a crisis that could change everything. I felt a surge of sympathy for them, even amidst the tension that had defined our relationship for so long. They had their flaws, but this was their livelihood at risk. What do you need us to do? I asked, stepping forward, wanting to help however I could. Right now, we need to strategize, my father said, his tone serious as he joined us. We need to make some calls and reach out to other clients. But we also need to find a way to address this client's concerns, or we risk losing everything. Can we help with anything? Miguel offered, surprising me with his willingness to dive into the chaos. I admired his courage and determination. My father looked thoughtful for a moment. If you could help with market research, gather data on our competitors, anything that could give us an edge, it would be helpful, he said, his voice firm. We need to show them we're still a viable option. Absolutely. We can start tonight, Miguel said, already pulling out his laptop. I felt a swell of pride for him. for how committed he was to supporting me and my family, even in the face of adversity. As we delved into the details of the situation, the air was thick with urgency. We spent the next few hours brainstorming, poring over spreadsheets and client profiles. The tension shifted from personal conflicts to a unified front as we focused on the task at hand. I think we can offer them a new package that highlights our strengths, Miguel suggested, tapping away at his keyboard. If we can address their concerns directly and show them how we can provide better service than our competitors, it could make a difference. Good idea, my father said, nodding. We need to be proactive. They're not just going to wait around while we figure this out. We worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination. I watched as my father transformed into the businessman I had always admired. The tension that had once defined our interactions faded, replaced by a shared purpose. As the hours passed, I felt a sense of camaraderie growing among us. Miguel seamlessly integrated into the process, his insights proving invaluable. He had a knack for seeing things from a fresh perspective, and I could tell my parents were beginning to appreciate him more. Finally, as the clock ticked past midnight, we compiled our findings into a comprehensive presentation. This should give us a fighting chance, Miguel said, looking at my father with a hopeful expression. Thank you, both of you. I never expected this kind of support, my father admitted, his voice filled with sincerity. As we prepared to call the client the next morning, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. It was a strange feeling, having my family's dynamic shift so rapidly, yet still battling with the memories of our past. When morning came, I barely slept, my mind racing with what lay ahead. Miguel and I arrived at my parents' house early, and I could see the determination in my father's eyes as he reviewed the presentation one last time. Let's make this happen, he said, clenching his jaw. We can't let them walk away from us without a fight. As we gathered around the dining room table, the atmosphere was charged with energy. My mother prepared a simple breakfast, her hands shaking slightly as she set out the plates. I know we can do this, she said, trying to project confidence despite the uncertainty hanging in the air. We reviewed our strategy, making sure everyone was on the same page. Miguel took charge of presenting the proposal to the client, and I could see how much it meant to him to contribute to our family's well-being. Just remember, we're in this together, he said, his voice calm yet firm. We've got a solid plan, and if we stick to it, we'll make it work. The moment of truth arrived as we dialed the client's number. My heart raced as I listened to the ringing on the other end, praying that they would pick up. Finally, a voice answered, and I felt my father's hand tighten around the phone. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. This is Henry Davis from Davis Enterprises. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, my father said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Of course, Henry. I wanted to discuss our contract. I'm concerned about some recent issues, Mr. Thompson replied, his tone serious. My father took a deep breath, glancing at Miguel and me for support. I understand your concerns, and we've taken a hard look at our services to see how we can address them. We've prepared a new proposal that outlines how we plan to improve and enhance our partnership, he said, his confidence growing. I watched as Miguel interjected with details about the new package we had crafted, highlighting our strengths and how we could better serve their needs. His voice was calm and collected, a stark contrast to the anxiety I felt. As the conversation unfolded, I could see my father relaxing, regaining the confidence that had been shaken just days before. They discussed the proposal in detail, with Miguel answering questions and providing insights that clearly impressed Mr. Thompson. Finally, as the call came to a close, my father hung up, a look of triumph spreading across his face. We did it. They're willing to reconsider, but we need to follow up with a written proposal by the end of the week, he said, his voice filled with relief. Miguel and I exchanged ecstatic looks, the weight of the world lifting from our shoulders. This is just the beginning, I said, feeling the adrenaline coursing through me. But as we celebrated, the undercurrent of stress lingered. While we had achieved a small victory, the reality of my mother's health still loomed over us. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over yet. In the days that followed, my mother underwent further tests to assess her condition. Each appointment filled me with dread, and while I tried to focus on supporting my parents, the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Miguel remained my rock through it all. He would hold my hand during the difficult moments, his presence grounding me when the uncertainty felt overwhelming. "We'll face this together," he would remind me, his voice steady and reassuring. As my mother's condition stabilized, I felt a renewed sense of hope. She began to open up more, sharing her fears and vulnerabilities in a way I had never seen before. One evening, while we sat together in the living room, she turned to me, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm scared, Jasmine," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I've always been the strong one, but this has shaken me. I didn't realize how fragile life could be until now." I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're not alone, Mom. We're all here for you, and we'll get through this together. You're stronger than you think." She smiled, her expression softening. "Thank you for being here. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm sorry for how I treated you and Miguel. I want to do better." Her words filled me with warmth, and I felt the weight of our past grievances begin to lift. "It's okay, Mom. We're all learning and growing together. That's what family is about." As the weeks passed, my mother's health continued to improve, and our family dynamic shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. My parents were learning to embrace the love and support that Miguel offered, and I could see them beginning to accept him as part of our family. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my father turned to Miguel, a newfound respect in his eyes. "I have to say, Miguel, I didn't give you enough credit before. You've shown us how dedicated you are, and I admire that." Miguel smiled, surprise evident on his face. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I just want what's best for Jasmine, and I'm grateful to be part of your family." The atmosphere felt lighter, filled with laughter and shared stories. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined our interactions. I felt a warmth in my heart as I watched my parents genuinely engage with Miguel, accepting him as an equal. But just as we were finding our footing, my father received another call that would turn our world upside down again. As he answered the phone, I could see the worry etched on his face. "Hello, yes. This is Henry Davis. What do you mean you're pulling out?" His voice turned cold, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I sensed the shift in the room. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart racing. He ended the call, his expression grim. "It's the client. They've decided to terminate the contract despite our proposal," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What does that mean for the business?" I asked, the reality crashing down around us. "It means we're in trouble. This could be devastating for us," he replied, his tone filled with anguish. The room fell silent, the weight of the news settling heavily around us. I looked at Miguel, who remained calm but resolute. "We'll find a way to make it work. We can gather more data, explore new clients, and brainstorm solutions together," he said, his voice steady. My parents looked at him, surprise etched on their faces. "You'd really help us?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Of course. We're a family, and families support each other," Miguel replied, his determination shining through. In that moment, I felt a surge of hope amidst the chaos. We were facing yet another storm, but this time, we were united, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. It was a pivotal moment, one that would define our future as a family. As we gathered around the table once more, we began to strategize, refusing to let adversity tear us apart. With renewed energy, we dove back into planning, determined to find a way to save the business and secure our futures. Little did we know that the true test of our resolve was yet to come, and the challenges ahead would push us all to our limits. In the days that followed my father's shocking news, our lives felt like they were hanging in the balance. The weight of uncertainty loomed over us as my parents scrambled to navigate the crisis, while Miguel and I supported them in every way we could. We spent countless hours researching potential clients, refining pitches, and brainstorming strategies to recover what had been lost. The evenings blurred together into a chaotic mix of work and worry, but there was an underlying sense of unity that I hadn't felt before. For the first time, it seemed like my family was truly coming together, rallying around the shared goal of survival. One evening, as we gathered around the dining table, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of tension and determination. My father laid out our latest findings, flipping through the pages of our proposals. If we can land at least two of these clients, we might be able to stabilize the business, he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. Miguel nodded, his eyes scanning the documents. We should focus on tailoring our pitches to highlight our strengths and how we can specifically address their needs. That might give us an edge, he suggested, his voice calm but assertive. Exactly, my father said, his expression softening as he glanced at Miguel. I appreciate your insights. It's refreshing to have someone with a different perspective on the team. I watched as my parents' attitudes towards Miguel continued to evolve, and I felt a swell of pride for both of them. They were slowly beginning to see him as an equal, someone who genuinely cared about our family's well-being. It was a stark contrast to how they had treated him in the past. As the discussion progressed, I felt a sense of hope rising within me. We were all working toward a common goal, and it felt good to know that we were in this together. However, I couldn't shake the anxiety that still clung to the air. My mother's health had improved, but the stress of the business situation weighed heavily on her. One afternoon, after a long day of strategizing, I found myself in the kitchen preparing dinner while Miguel worked on his art in the other room. I could hear the faint sounds of him painting, the soothing rhythm of his brush against the canvas, bringing me comfort. But as I chopped vegetables, my mind wandered to my parents and the uncertainty surrounding their business. I couldn't help but worry about the toll it was taking on them. They had always been the pillars of strength in my life, and seeing them struggle was painful. The realization that they were vulnerable, that they needed support just like anyone else, hit me hard. I needed to be there for them, just as they had been there for me during my darkest moments. Jazz, what are you thinking about? Miguel called out, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned to him, forcing a smile. Just the usual worries. I'm concerned about my parents, especially my mom. I hate seeing them like this. He set his brush down and walked into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around me from behind. You're doing everything you can. Just being there for them makes a difference. I leaned back against him, taking comfort in his presence. I know, but I feel like I need to do more. I want to help them, to make sure they're okay. You're doing great, Jazz. You've already shown them how strong you are. Just keep being there for them, and everything will work out, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. As we continued to cook together, the atmosphere in the kitchen lightened. We joked and laughed, and for a moment, I allowed myself to forget the stress of the outside world. It was a reminder that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we had each other. That evening, as we sat down to dinner with my parents, the tension seemed to ease slightly. My mother served a hearty meal, her cooking always a source of comfort, and as we gathered around the table, I could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. Thank you for everything you've done, my father said, looking at Miguel with gratitude. Your insights have been invaluable. I don't know what we would do without you. Miguel smiled, his humility shining through. I'm just glad to help. We're all in this together, right? As the evening progressed, we shared stories and laughter, the weight of the world momentarily lifting. I could see my mother relaxing, the stress lines on her face softening. It was a small victory, but one that felt significant. But the following week, just as we were beginning to feel a sense of stability, another wave of uncertainty crashed over us. I received a call from my mother while I was at work, her voice trembling on the other end. Jasmine, we need you to come home. It's about your father. Panic surged through me as I rushed to gather my things. What happened? I asked, my heart racing. He collapsed at work. The doctors are running tests, but we don't know what's wrong yet. I felt the world tilt beneath me, and I forced myself to focus on the road as I drove to their house. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The thought of losing my father, of facing another crisis, sent waves of fear coursing through me. When I arrived at their house, my mother was waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. "He's in the hospital. They're doing tests, but they don't know what caused it," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I wrapped my arms around her, my heart breaking for the woman who had always been my rock. "It's going to be okay, Mom. We'll get through this together," I whispered, trying to comfort her even as my own fears threatened to overwhelm me. As we drove to the hospital, my mind was a whirlpool of anxiety. What if something was seriously wrong? What if we lost him? I had already faced so much uncertainty. I didn't know if I could handle another blow. When we arrived at the hospital, we were met with a flurry of activity. My father was being wheeled into a room, and I could see the worry etched on my mother's face as we followed closely behind. I felt Miguel's hand find mine, squeezing it tightly as we walked down the sterile corridor. "Everything is going to be fine," he murmured, his voice steady. As we entered my father's room, I was struck by the sight of him lying in the hospital bed, wires and monitors beeping around him. The sight was jarring, and my heart sank as I took in the reality of the situation. "Dad," I whispered, moving closer. "What happened?" He looked up at me, his face pale but his eyes filled with determination. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just a little scare. They think it might be stress-related," he said, trying to reassure me. My mother took his hand, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "You need to take better care of yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't keep pushing yourself so hard." I know," he replied, his voice strained. "But I'm trying to keep everything together for us." I felt a surge of compassion for him, realizing how much pressure he had been under. "We're in this together, Dad. You don't have to carry this weight alone," I said, my voice steady. As the doctor entered the room, I felt a rush of anxiety. "Mr. Davis, I'm glad to see you awake," he said, his tone professional but kind. "We're going to run some more tests, but I want to assure you that you're in good hands." After the doctor explained the situation, I felt a sense of hope, though the worries still lingered in the back of my mind. The tests would take time, and I knew we had a long road ahead. While we waited, I watched my parents interact, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope for their relationship. My mother cared for my father, her worry evident in her every gesture. They were leaning on each other, just as Miguel and I had learned to do. Eventually, as night fell, we were told that my father's condition was stable and he would be kept for observation. "You should both go home and get some rest," he said, his voice tired but reassuring. "I'll be fine." But I didn't want to leave. I wanted to be there for him, to support my family during this uncertain time. Miguel must have sensed my reluctance, for he squeezed my hand, silently encouraging me to stay strong. "Let's go home," my mother said, her voice soft but firm. "We can't do anything more tonight. We'll be back in the morning." As we drove home, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. I was scared, angry, and overwhelmed. How could everything change so quickly? I glanced at Miguel, who remained calm, his presence a steady anchor amidst the storm. When we arrived home, I collapsed onto the couch, feeling utterly drained. Miguel sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You've been through a lot today," he said gently. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed. I just hate seeing them like this," I admitted, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I want to help, but I feel so powerless." "You're not powerless. You're doing everything you can," he replied, his voice soothing. "Just being there for them is enough." As the night wore on, I felt a sense of exhaustion wash over me. I knew I needed to rest, but sleep eluded me as my mind raced with worries. Finally, I succumbed to fatigue, drifting off with Miguel's comforting presence by my side. The next morning, I woke to the soft light streaming through the window. I sat up, feeling the weight of the world still pressing on my shoulders. Miguel was still asleep, his face relaxed in the morning light. I brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, grateful for his unwavering support. After a quick breakfast, we headed back to the hospital, my heart heavy with anticipation. As we approached my father's room, I felt a sense of dread creeping in. What if the tests had revealed something serious? What if our lives were about to change forever? When we entered the room, I was met with the sight of my father sitting up in bed, a nurse adjusting his foredrip. He looked better than the night before, and relief washed over me. "Hey there, champ," he said, his voice stronger than it had been. "Dad." I rushed over, enveloping him in a hug. "I was so worried about you." He smiled, the worry lines on his face beginning to soften. "I'm fine, just a little tired. The doctor has some news for us." As we waited for the doctor to arrive, I could see the anxiety creeping back into my mother's expression. She sat at my father's bedside, holding his hand tightly. "What did they say?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Just a few more tests to go," my father replied, his tone reassuring. "But they think it might just be stress and exhaustion. I've been pushing myself too hard." A moment later, the doctor entered the room, and my heart raced as he approached my father's bed. "Good morning, Mr. Davis. I have your test results," he said, his tone calm but serious. My heart pounded as he spoke. "Overall, your tests came back normal. However, we did find that your blood pressure is elevated, which is concerning given your recent symptoms. We recommend lifestyle changes, including reducing stress and getting more rest." I felt a rush of relief wash over me, but I could also see the worry in my father's eyes. "You mean I need to slow down? This is my livelihood we're talking about," he said, his voice strained. The doctor nodded. "Yes, but your health comes first. You need to take this seriously, or it could lead to more severe issues down the line. I'd recommend seeking help to manage your stress levels." After the doctor left, we sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the news. I glanced at my mother, who looked both relieved and worried. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "We need to prioritize our health and well-being." I nodded in agreement, my heart swelling with hope. "We can make this work together. We'll support each other through this," I said, glancing at Miguel, who smiled reassuringly. As the days passed, we focused on supporting my father's recovery. Miguel and I began to help with household chores, meal prep, and research into stress management techniques. We encouraged my parents to take breaks, to enjoy life outside of work, and to spend quality time together. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, I felt a renewed sense of hope for our family. "Let's make a pact," I suggested, my voice filled with determination. "We'll prioritize our health and happiness. No more putting work above everything else." My parents exchanged glances, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I agree," my father said, nodding. "We need to find a balance." "We're in this together," my mother added, her voice steady. "No more secrets or pushing ourselves to the limit." As the weeks turned into months, I watched my family begin to heal, both physically and emotionally. The strain of the business crisis faded, replaced by a newfound appreciation for one another. We were becoming closer, not just as a family, but as a team, united in our desire for a better life. And through it all, Miguel remained my unwavering support. He had shown my parents the kind of love and dedication that I had always wanted them to see. It was a profound change, and I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us all together. But just as things were looking up, I received an unexpected call from my mother that would shake the foundation of everything we had built. "Jasmine, we need to talk. It's about your father and the business," she said, her voice serious. My heart raced as I processed her words. "What's going on?" I asked, anxiety creeping in once again. "Can you come over? It's important." As I drove to my parents' house, the feeling of unease returned. What could this be about? Had something happened to the business again? Or was it something more serious? My mind raced with possibilities as I parked in front of their home. When I entered, I found my parents waiting in the living room, their expressions somber. "What's wrong?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "We've had some unexpected developments," my father said, his voice heavy. "We've received news from a competitor, and we need to discuss our next steps." I could see the anxiety etched on my mother's face. "What kind of news?" I pressed, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. It's about the contract we were working on. They've decided to partner with another firm, my father said, his voice strained. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. My heart sank with it. But we were so close, I said, disbelief washing over me. What does that mean for the business? It means we're back to square one, he replied, his expression filled with frustration. We have to figure out how to recover from this, and fast. I felt the world tilt beneath me again, the sense of security we had just felt crumbling around us. What can we do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. We need to regroup and come up with a new strategy, my mother said, determination flaring in her eyes. We can't let this setback define us. As the conversation continued, I felt a sense of resolve rising within me. We had faced challenges before, and we could do it again. We were a family, and we would find a way to overcome this together. As we started brainstorming ideas, I could see the fire returning to my father's eyes. We've faced challenges before, and we've come out stronger. This is just another hurdle, he said, his voice steady. I looked at Miguel, who nodded in agreement, his presence a constant source of strength. Together, we could face anything. We just had to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The evening ended with a renewed sense of purpose, and I felt the bond between us strengthen as we began to plan our next steps. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them together, united as a family. The days following the news of my father's business setback were a blur of activity and anxiety. We rallied together as a family, determined to find a way to recover from the loss of the contract. The tension was palpable, but I could feel a newfound sense of unity among us, something that had been missing for far too long. Miguel became an integral part of our planning sessions. He worked tirelessly alongside my parents and me, his creativity and insights proving invaluable. It was during these late-night brainstorming sessions that I realized just how much he had become a part of my family. My parents, once wary of him, were now openly discussing strategies and ideas with him, their earlier skepticism giving way to respect. As we sat around the dining table one evening, papers strewn everywhere and the remnants of a hastily made dinner pushed aside, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Okay, let's recap what we have so far, my father said, leaning forward, determination etched on his face. We need to focus on diversifying our client base and finding new opportunities. Miguel nodded, his eyes bright with ideas. We should consider tapping into emerging markets. There are niches that haven't been explored yet, and if we can position ourselves as pioneers in those areas, we could gain a significant edge. I marveled at the synergy that had developed between my parents and Miguel. The way they engaged with each other, bouncing ideas off one another, made my heart swell with pride. That sounds promising, I chimed in, eager to contribute. We can research potential clients and see where their needs align with our services. As we delved deeper into our discussions, I felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose growing. We were no longer just a family dealing with personal issues. We were a team working toward a common goal. But even amidst this newfound unity, I couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at me. My mother had recently experienced health scares, and the stress of the business crisis had taken its toll on her. I could see the fatigue in her eyes, and I worried about the weight she was carrying. One evening, after a long day of strategizing, I decided to check in on her. As I entered the living room, I found her sitting on a couch, staring blankly at the television. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" I asked, settling down beside her. She turned to me, her expression softening. "I'm okay, just tired," she said, but I could see the strain beneath her words. It's been a lot to handle lately. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You don't have to carry all of this alone. We're all here to support you," I reassured her. She sighed, leaning into me. "I know, but I can't help but worry about your father and the business. I've always been the one to keep things together, and now it feels like everything is falling apart." "Things will get better, I promise," I said, my voice steady. "We're working hard to find solutions, and Miguel is helping more than you realize." He's become such a vital part of this family. She smiled faintly, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. I'm glad you have him. He's a good influence on you, and I can see how much he cares for you. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot, I replied, feeling a surge of warmth. We sat together in comfortable silence, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over us. But the calm didn't last long. Just a few days later, we received a phone call that would shake the foundation of our newfound stability. It was late in the afternoon when my father answered the call in the living room. I could hear his voice rising, tinged with frustration. What do you mean you're terminating the contract? My heart raced as I exchanged worried glances with Miguel. We both knew how critical this contract was to my father's business, and the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. When my father hung up the phone, he looked older, wearier. They're pulling out, he said, his voice strained. After everything we've done, they decided to go with a competitor who promised more favorable terms. The weight of his words settled heavily in a room, and I could see my mother's face pale as the realization sank in. What does this mean for us? She asked, her voice trembling. It means we need to regroup and find new clients fast, my father replied, determination flickering in his eyes. We're not done yet. We've faced worse, and we can come back from this. But how? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. We've already lost so much ground. We need to think creatively, Miguel interjected, his voice calm. Let's analyze our competitors and see what we can offer that they can't. We need to pivot, find a new direction. The urgency in his tones sparked something within me. What if we develop a new marketing strategy? We can showcase our strengths and highlight the personal touch that larger firms often overlook. My father nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. That's a good idea, Jasmine. We can create a campaign that emphasizes our commitment to our clients, the relationships we build. It's something the big firms can't replicate. As we sat around the table, strategizing and brainstorming new ideas, I felt a renewed sense of determination growing within me. We were going to fight for this, for our family, and for the business that meant so much to all of us. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Miguel and I worked late into the night, researching competitors, crafting marketing pitches, and reaching out to potential clients. My parents stepped up, utilizing their network to spread the word about our services and the changes we were implementing. But amidst the hustle, I couldn't shake the worry that weighed on my heart. My mother's health was still a concern, and I often found myself checking in on her, making sure she was eating properly and taking care of herself. The stress of the business crisis was taking a toll on all of us, but I couldn't let it push us apart again. One evening, as we gathered around the dining table to discuss our progress, I noticed my mother looked more fatigued than usual. Are you feeling okay, Mom? I asked, concern etched on my face. She waved me off, a faint smile on her lips. I'm fine, just a bit tired from all the work. I want to help in any way I can. You need to rest too, I insisted, my voice firm. We're all in this together, and we can't afford to burn ourselves out. Jasmine's right. My father chimed in, his tone supportive. We need you healthy, Mom. You can't pour from an empty cup. My mother nodded, but I could see the worry still lurking in her eyes. I knew the pressure was weighing heavily on her, and I wished I could take some of that burden away. As the weeks went on, our efforts began to pay off. We secured a few small contracts, and as we started to stabilize, I felt a renewed sense of hope blossoming within our family. Miguel's creativity and enthusiasm breathed new life into our approach, and I could see my parents slowly beginning to adapt to the changes. But just when I thought we were finally catching a break, another challenge emerged. One evening, as I was wrapping up at the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Can you come home early? We need to talk. Panic surged through me as I rushed through my closing duties, my mind racing with possibilities. What could possibly be wrong now? Had something happened with the business again? Or was it something personal? When I arrived home, I found Miguel waiting for me in the living room, his expression grave. What's going on? I asked, concern flooding my voice. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. It's about your father's health. My heart dropped. What happened? He collapsed again at work today. They're doing tests at the hospital, and I think you should go with me to see him, he said, his voice filled with concern. Without hesitation, I nodded, my heart racing as I grabbed my things. Let's go. When we arrived at the hospital, I felt the familiar sense of dread wash over me. I could see my mother pacing outside my father's room, her face etched with worry. As we approached, she turned to us, her eyes filled with fear. They're running tests, but he's still unconscious. I don't know what's happening, she said, her voice trembling. Miguel stepped forward, his presence a steadying force. We're here for you, and we'll get through this together, he reassured her, his voice calm. We waited anxiously in the sterile waiting room, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me, and I could see my mother's anxiety escalating. When the doctor finally came out, I felt a rush of relief mixed with dread. Mr. Davis is stable, but we're still waiting on some results, he said, his tone professional but gentle. It seems he's experiencing some complications due to stress, and we want to monitor him closely. I exhaled, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. Is he going to be okay? I asked, my voice trembling. For now, yes. But we need to address the underlying issues. Stress can have serious effects on health, and it's crucial for him to take a step back and prioritize his well-being, the doctor explained. As we sat in the waiting room, I could feel my mother's worry simmering just beneath the surface. What if he doesn't recover? What if this is serious? She whispered, her voice trembling. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. We're going to support him through this, Mom. We'll figure it out together, I promise. The hours dragged on as we waited for news. Finally, we were allowed to see my father, and as we entered the room, I felt a surge of relief mixed with fear. He lay in the hospital bed, looking pale but stable. Hey, Dad, I said softly, moving closer. We're here. He opened his eyes, a weak smile spreading across his face. Hey there, champ. Sorry to worry you all. Don't apologize, I said, squeezing his hand gently. We're just glad you're okay. As we spoke, I could see the relief in my mother's eyes, and I felt a sense of hope beginning to bloom. We had faced so much together, and this was yet another challenge that would test our strength. In the days that followed, my father was discharged from the hospital, and we worked to ensure he took it easy. We established a new routine focused on his health, prioritizing family time and open communication. Miguel remained a constant source of support, encouraging my father to explore stress relief techniques and find balance in his life. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. I'm so thankful for all of you, I said, looking at my parents and Miguel. We've been through so much, but we're still standing together. My father smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. We've learned a lot about ourselves and each other through this. I appreciate your support, both of you. Miguel nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Family means sticking together, no matter what. As we shared stories and laughter, I felt a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. The struggles we had faced had brought us closer together, forging a bond that was unbreakable. But as the weeks turned into months, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still teetering on the edge of uncertainty. Despite our progress, the threat of another setback loomed in the background, and I couldn't help but worry about what the future held for us. Just when I thought we had turned a corner, my mother received another call that would change everything once again. It was a call from the hospital regarding my father's health. As she spoke, her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Jasmine, we need to go, she said, her voice trembling. They found something unusual in his tests. They want him to come back in. My heart dropped as panic surged through me. What do you mean? Is he okay? I asked, fear clawing at my insides. I don't know. We need to hurry, she said, her voice urgent. As we raced to the hospital, I felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Had we really just begun to heal, only to face another crisis? I glanced at Miguel, who remained steady beside me, his presence grounding me amidst the chaos. When we arrived, The atmosphere was tense. The hospital staff seemed to move with urgency, and I felt a sense of dread creeping in. I could see my father pacing in the waiting room, his expression filled with concern. "What's happening?" I asked, my heart pounding. "They want to run more tests, but I'm scared," he admitted, his voice strained. "What if it's serious?" I felt my stomach drop. "We'll face this together, Dad. You're not alone in this." As we waited for the doctor to arrive, I could see the worry etched on my parents' faces. The uncertainty hung heavily in the air, and I knew we were once again on the brink of a storm. Finally, the doctor entered the room, his expression serious. "Mr. Davis, we have your test results. We need to discuss your health moving forward." I held my breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Whatever news was about to come could change everything once again.